What is going on, guys, and welcome back to Touchdowns to Home Runs. My name's Bernie. Thank you for joining us today on the Touchdowns to Home Runs show. Hope that your day is going absolutely fantastic. Now, for some reason, after the conclusion of the NFL draft, I thought it was just time to go back to college football, start doing some more previews and predictions. So today we're going to be looking at the SEC West and doing a bold prediction for each one of the 7 teams. Now, I think the SEC as a conference and sort of as a whole is definitely the best football conference going into the 2021 season, but the SEC West portion of the SEC in particular, I think, has a lot of very, very interesting teams. So we're going to be breaking those down today. Now, keep in mind that these are just bold predictions. I don't necessarily think that they're going to happen. I just think that these are things that these teams should be striving for. And in a really, really good year, things that could potentially happen for these teams. And just before we do get into the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs, because we're going to be doing the SEC East version of this probably early on next week. But the first team that we have is the LSU Tigers, and the bold prediction for them: double-digit wins in 2021. Now, after winning the Natty 2 years ago, the LSU Tigers had a very bad year last year, 5-5 record, but I think a lot of the games were worse than that. They had a lot of offensive and defensive struggles. They had lost a lot of guys, and that middle portion of the year, I think in particularly, was really not good for the Tigers. But unlike last year, they're returning almost everyone on defense, and really nowhere to go but up from here. And after a really, really brutal defensive year, I think you're going to see a huge improvement coming into this 2020 year. Now, in terms of offensively, you obviously lost a couple of your top receivers, but I think Boutte leading that wide receiver room is primed for another big year and sort of building off what he did last year, particularly at the end of the year. And you're most likely getting Gilbert back as well, which is a huge help to the offense. So I think this is a very, very talented offense when you look at it on paper. Now, I think the big X factor here for the players in terms of LSU's got to be Miles Brennan, their quarterback. They need some consistency at quarterback, and I really liked what I saw from him at the beginning part of the year, but then obviously dealt with some injuries. We didn't get to see him over the course of a full season, but I think if Miles Brennan is fully healthy, this is a very talented offense and a defense that is getting better. Now, LSU has a couple of really big games, Bama, Texas A&M in particular. They could technically lose both of those games and still have double-digit wins. But I think if you're LSU and LSU fans, you're really looking at that A&M game in particular as sort of being able to have a one-loss season. A&M's probably going to be in the top 5, which gives you a chance for a top 5 win. The game's also in LSU, so a bit of a benefit there. But again, LSU double-digit wins. Texas A&M next. I think that this is sort of the prediction that a lot of people have, which is Texas A&M gives Bama a bit of a run for the SEC West title. And then I also have a second bold prediction, which is Ainias Smith has 1,200 total yards on offense. We'll start with the first part of that. Now, Texas A&M got blown out by Bama last year, but they do have them at home this year in 2021. Bama also lost a lot of their guys, particularly on offense, though they're still very, very talented, but not as talented as last year. Because, of course, they on top of the returning players, they got a great recruiting class, the best ever coming in. But I watched this A&M spring game, and A&M is one of the most interesting teams in college football, starting with that competition at the quarterback position. You got King and Calzada, but I think no matter who the quarterback ends up being, you got 2 winning quarterbacks over there. You got a top backfield, a very solid defense, and a very well-coached team as well. As for Ainias Smith, over 1,200 yards, I think he came very close to that last year. I think he had 1,000 yards, so 1,200 would be a little bit of a step up. But again, I think he's one of the best two-way backs in terms of being able to run the football, but also being a huge part of this A&M offense in terms of what he does, of course, in the receiving game. Next up, we got Auburn. Now, this was a bit of sort of a tough one for me, but I went with produces the top 2 tackles leaders in the SEC. McLean last year led the SEC in tackles with 113, but a lot of people are also expecting Papo, the former 5-star in 2019, to have a big sort of jump and breakthrough in his junior year this year. He had 93 tackles last year, not a bad season by any means, but he's sort of a part of this middle Auburn defense that's just absolutely sensational. Now, I don't know if these guys can really be 1 and 2, but look out for these 2 guys to be right up there in the SEC in tackles. Next up, we got Alabama. Now, it's really tough to sort of do bold predictions with Alabama because I don't even know what counts as a bold prediction for Alabama anymore, just because the expectations for them are so high. But I went with Nick Saban, and the Bama defense ranks number 1 in college football. Alabama's defense is ranked number 1 4 times since 2010, but out of all the years, I think this is the one that you would expect it probably the least, because you had Surtain, Moses Barmore, really some top guys on this Bama defense go to the NFL draft. But you got to remember, you got Will Anderson, you got Christian Harris, 2 guys that I really think are going to be All-American candidates. And from everything I've heard, the coaching staff and everybody's just really high on this Bama defense still. You also got to remember the offense won't be as good. You lost more players on offense than you did on defense. So more so than last year when you had a record-setting offense, there's going to be more pressure and more focus on the defense this year. Next up, Mississippi State. I have them as knocking off 1, maybe 2 ranked opponents. Now, saying Mississippi State was underwhelming last year would sort of be an understatement. You had a 4-7 record, and you went into the year not necessarily with high expectations, but with decent expectations at the start of the year, and you really went through an awful downhill spiral in the middle part of the season. I think for Mississippi State, the big X factor here is you got more QB consistency with Will Rogers over there. They were a little 50-50 on who their quarterback was last year. You're getting Will Rogers this year, who was great down the stretch of the season. I think is going to be big for Mississippi State. I'm looking at that third last game against Auburn. It is an away game, but I do think that's their best shot to probably knock off a ranked opponent if Auburn is still ranked at that time. But yeah, it's just a bold prediction. Ole Miss, I have Lane Kiffin, and Ole Miss will be sneaky good this year and give a top 5 team, more likely Texas A&M, a run for their money in their game this year. Now, again, it's a bold prediction for a reason. I don't think this is necessarily going to happen, but I do think that this Ole Miss team is better than the Ole Miss teams that we've seen in the past. They play A&M November 13, which is in the later part of the season, probably when Texas A&M is 8-1, assuming they lose their 1 game to Bama. And it's a home game for Ole Miss. But again, this is more talented. It's a home game. You got a couple things here pointing in your favor. So that's my Ole Miss prediction. 7th and final prediction for this video is for the Arkansas Razorbacks, where I have Treylon Burks leading the SEC in receiving yards. Now, last year he was targeted a ton. I think he was targeted like double anybody else on that Arkansas offense, which means he definitely gets the opportunities to do so. Now, last year, he was ranked 5th in the SEC in receiving yards, but 3 of the 4 guys who were ahead of him, and Kyle Pitts, who was just behind him, all got drafted, which means out of the returning receivers, I'd probably have Treylon Burks right in that top 3, at least in the top 5 receivers in the SEC. I don't know how good Arkansas is going to be as a whole and as a team, and I don't know how great their offense is even going to be coming into the year, but he definitely plays the biggest role in the offense, so I think he's going to have those opportunities. But anyways, guys, if you did make it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you agree with these bold predictions? Do you have other bold predictions for these 7 teams? I want to hear it all down below. If you did enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs. It does me a huge favor, but you guys also aren't going to want to miss the SEC East bold predictions that are going to be coming out early on next week. As always, guys, though, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.